Hey there, and welcome to episode 13 of the IT Guy Show. I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, and today I'm also going to be my own guest. So, one of the things I've always wanted to try with a podcast is to kind of set up episode arcs. You watch a TV show and you get two or three episodes strung together where it kind of follows the same storyline, the same thread. So, that's what we're going to do. So, in this episode, I'm going to kind of set it up. I want to talk a little bit about my own story. Um, how I got into IT, some of the things that I learned along the way, not just to tell you about myself, but in the hopes that my journey might spark yours too. Maybe you've been talking about changing directions. Maybe you're new to the industry and you just want to get deeper involved in tech. Well, I want to share my own story. It felt like a wild and crazy journey, but looking back, it all makes perfect sense to get me to where I am today. And then in the next couple of episodes, want to bring on some friends, colleagues. One's a systems administrator, one's a developer, and we're going to talk a little bit about their journeys. So you'll definitely want to catch this episode before watching those, just to kind of get some of the context. So I've been involved in technology since I was very young, like 5 or 6 years old, maybe a little older. Uh, but my first memory of working on computers, of working with technology, was sitting at my dad's Mac 2, and I guess it would have been an Apple II, and changing the desktop wallpaper and moving the desktop icons around. And he just had no idea how I did it. Um, be honest, I'm not sure how I figured it out either, but, it was cool because instead of vertical lines, you had, like, hash-shaped lines, and, that's what you get with a grayscale monitor. But that was kind of my first real dive into technology, and it just kinda continued on from there. When I was, I grew up in the '90s and, '80s baby, though, '80s baby. I still love me some Journey and whatnot. But going through high school, college, I had one of the first BlackBerrys. I had a BlackBerry Pearl. Before that, I had, some kind of a Palm Pilot. I don't remember whose it was, but, my senior year of high school, I had a Palm Pilot, and my buddy and I would sit in science class and play hearts on this Palm Pilot with the stylus that you had to tap really hard on the screen, and you were always afraid that the stylus was going to go through the screen because the sensitivity wasn't there. But then getting a BlackBerry Pearl and hooking it up to an Exchange server so I could get work emails on my phone. It was really exciting. Let's see, what other devices did I have? Like, I had one of the first one of the first, iPods, uh, and, in college, discussed LimeWire and how amazing that was, but, yeah, I've always been involved with technology. And it seems like for most of my career, uh, I've been involved with the installation, configuration, and deployment of systems. I was a big distro hopper for years. Uh, well, I can't say big, there's people that jump from crazy different distros to different distros beyond that. Um, I would jump between Ubuntu and Arch uh, and Fedora, and I tried Red Hat Enterprise Linux as a desktop once. Great server, not a great workstation experience, at least not 15 years ago. I can remember being a freshman in college and a buddy of mine telling me about this Ubuntu thing, and it was so cool because it wasn't Windows. Of course, it was a pain to get the Wi-Fi card working. I tried Ubuntu, and it just couldn't work on this Dell, XPS back in the day. So I went with what was at the time known as Fedora Core, and this would have been, mid-2000s. So the split between Red Hat Linux and Fedora Core would have just happened, and Fedora Core actually worked. The wireless card, you didn't have to, like, pre-configure or anything. I can remember sitting in the cafeteria at DeVry in Kansas City and installing Fedora for the first time and playing with it and taking an introduction to Linux class. It was kind of a joke looking back. It was, "This is the desktop environment. This is how you install a printer on Linux." It was very workstation focused. It wasn't server focused like I would have expected. Um, and that's really funny because, over the past few weeks, I'm just getting started as a professor at Johnson County Community College here in Kansas City. Uh, so I've been involved with Linux on the desktop, on the server side. Was heavily involved in installation and configuration of systems, and then I got my first job as an IT guy. I worked as an intern for the city of Lee Summit, a suburb of Kansas City, and my first job was working with it was at the time Symantec Ghost, eventually it was Norton Ghost, building images for workstations. Sadly, it was all Windows. But it was kind of cool to think about, well, if I drop all these drivers on the C directory and then I point the configuration media to that directory in the C drive, then I can build one image that not only works on our laptops, but also on our desktops. And everyone needs Internet Explorer, and just thinking things through, like one of the dumb things that I would add to the image was, um a picture of Lee Summit City Hall, as the desktop background. It made it feel more official, and it was kind of fun to just build out these images and kinda think through what people might need, what they might not need, making sure that those images were up to date. Maybe one time accidentally did a multicast image across the production network instead of our workbench network, and may have severely slowed down the network for a few minutes until the network administrator, who I still talk to this day, he and I go to the same community group at our church, and he came in and he said, "You're not imaging these desktops, are you?" Like, "Yeah, why?" "Well, turns out when you multicast to the wrong NIC, all those multicast packets might go out across your network instead of to the workbench switch that you were targeting, or that you thought you were targeting." So I really enjoyed my internship with the City of Lee Summit because it gave me a chance to experience different things. I got to configure Exchange inboxes. I got to manage GPOs and Active Directory objects. Uh, One thing it taught me was how much I didn't like working on Windows administration, but that'll come into play a little bit later. It was a lot of fun though because I got to learn a lot. I got to put my hands on a lot of different technologies. I got to see what it was like to be a network administrator and work on Cisco switches and deal with tape drives and backups. So it was about a year-long internship. I got to stretch mine to like 15 or 16 months. It really taught me a lot. It was really great working for the city, and at the same time I was working part-time as an intern, I was also going through DeVry, working on a bachelor's degree. Um, the downside is whenever you talk to, and at least this was the case, X number of years ago, we won't fill in X, it was a long time ago. Alright, so it was like 20 years ago. Geez. So one of the things, at least 20 years ago, when you talk to the recruiter, for the college, or you talk to, your career coach, and you say, "I wanna work on computers, I wanna work in IT," they have just by default would send you down the programming course, down the development, computer science degree. So I took Visual Basic back in the day. Even then, it was a dead language and was really only used in labs to teach development principles and arrays and if-then statements, things like that, but I got halfway through a C# class, yeah, C#, and I went to my career coach and basically said, "This isn't for me. I couldn't write code like this all day, every day for 40 years. I would lose my mind." Being a little bit newer to the space, I didn't know what a networking lab was, but I was like, "Hey," when I walk to class, there's this room, and there's nothing but big computers and these network switch things that have just dozens of cables coming out there, and there's flashing lights everywhere. That's what I wanna do. How do I work on that? And so DeVry had actually just introduced a network communications management degree, an NCM degree, for their bachelor's program. And so I was like, "Let's do that." So next semester, I switched degree programs and, started taking a few networking courses based on CCNA for Cisco switching. I learned about Wi-Fi networks. I learned about WAN networks and what it was like to build out different, what cell towers were and that kind of thing at the time. Of course, none of that, information is relevant 20 years later. Wireless and Wi-Fi network technology has changed so much since then. I actually only had 2 operating system classes. I took one class on Windows, one class on Linux, and you kinda mentioned that it was kind of a joke, um, based on what I know now. But it was enough that coupled with my internship at the City Elite Summit, I knew I wanted to be on the server side. I knew I wanted to be on the administration side. So when I finally graduated college, I actually got headhunted by a recruiter from Cerner. Cerner was one of like 2 medical software companies back in the early 2000s, um, and they like to headhunt college grads uh, just out of college, and so I interviewed and got a job there. Um, I had actually got the choice to either work on their medical software or to be a systems administrator, basically an applications administrator, Java apps, um, on their internal, uh, intranet, basically an internal social media, platform before that was really even a thing. I mean, Facebook was barely getting off the ground, and Cerner was trying to build an intranet, based on, I think it was called Jive, back in the day. Uh, I did that for about a year and a half, and as we'll talk about here, in a future episode, I actually ended up getting laid off from that job, and then took a more traditional route into systems administration. I learned that Java is a nightmare, that, companies don't always have your personal best interest at heart. So Cerner was very eye-opening and a lot of fun. Got to learn a bunch of different technology on top of Linux. Um, Also got my feet wet with things like HPUX and AIX. Uh, but then as I said, I got laid off and kinda took a more traditional approach. I went back into desktop support, working on trouble tickets, but also managing some servers, even non-Windows based servers. So there's this pile of Linux boxes over in the corner, so to speak, in the data center that no one at the company I was working for wanted to deal with. So I was like, "I'll take those on," and basically web servers, PHP-based LAMP stacks, nothing all that exciting, but it was still Linux. Um, I can remember, mid-2011 or so, standing in a Borders bookstore. For those of you young people, bookstores were these places where you actually had 4 walls and a roof filled with books, the paper things. It was crazy. It was great. You'd go and you'd spend hours looking, and you'd come home with 6 books, and you'd read 2 of them, and everything else would sit on the so I distinctly remember standing in a Borders bookstore, and in one hand, I had an RHCSA, Red Hat Certified Systems Administrator study guide, and in the other, I had one of the introductory level Windows Server Administrator books. And I thought about it for days, and I looked at these 2 books, and I've dabbled in this Linux thing. I'd like to learn more. It's a lot more challenging, a lot more fun than this Windows stuff. Windows is always clear the registry and, you know, delete these GPO objects, just group policy. Just if you never have to deal with GPOs, you have a successful career. But I remember deciding that, okay, I want to do this Linux thing. I'm going to go all in. And so I went home that day with an RHCSA study guide, ended up changing jobs, uh, and ended up getting hired on as a Linux systems administrator, not even a junior, a Linux systems administrator. One of the guys that I worked for was, I think he'd been moving over from AIX to Linux, and the other guy was a VMS server administrator, and both of them were switching over to Linux. And so I actually went in and was able to learn with them, and we grew our environment together. I got my first exposure to Puppet and Spacewalk at the time. Other things like Nagios and OpenNMS, different open source tools. But open source hadn't really even entered my thinking yet. It was just Linux and some really cool free software that you could run on top of Linux. I ended up getting my R8 CSA. I almost got my R8 CE, missed it by, like, 5 points. I was devastated, but got my CSA, and, uh, we ran Oracle Linux and Red Hat Enterprise Linux side by side, uh, and, no, it was so much fun. I never should have left that job. In fact, something I learned from that was the grass isn't always greener. When you got a good thing going, even if you're a little tired, even if you're a little burned out, figure out a way to take time off or to switch gears, work on a different project or something. But when you got a good thing going, don't just abandon it. The next company I worked for ended up wanting a Linux systems administrator, but as frequently happens in smaller businesses, I ended up as the backup administrator, the storage administrator, the on-call Windows admin, um, the tape drive administrator, and my boss wanted me to learn a little bit about the networking stack and some of the switches and routers that we had. I was like, we're in the middle of an Oracle Rack database upgrade at a company that I just started at. They didn't even have UIDs and GIDs and alignment between systems. So, in case you don't know what that means, when you create a user on a Linux system, say Eric, and you look at the ID of that user, you'll see that group is Eric, user is Eric, and then UID is a numerical value for that user. So it could be 1,000, 1,001, that kind of thing. And then you'd have a group ID as well. Well, when they set up these systems, they didn't build them similarly. So they create users at different times. And so across systems, you'd run into this conflict where UIDs wouldn't line up. So you couldn't just directly SSH from one system to another and copy data over without having to do some permission changes. It was just such a pain. And I think that's why I love automation tools and infrastructure as code and tools like Image Builder that build things identically no matter where you deploy them. So so that job didn't last long, and I kinda bounced around for a few years to different jobs. I'd work and usually would end up as the patching guy. It became kind of a trope of my career that the first thing I always managed was patches, and, so it was kind of a rough journey, mostly because I realized that I never quite got to do what I wanted to do. And I don't mean that I didn't get to work on projects I wanted to work on, or I didn't get to do some fun thing at work. No, it was a mismatch of skill. Uh, I was at conflict with this whole, "Let me talk to everybody on the team and hang out in people's cubicles and get to know what they're working on," and, uh, and actually just sitting down for hours at a time and working on Linux systems. Um, it was kind of an interesting conflict because I've known forever that I'm an introvert, but I like talking to people. So how does that correlate itself out? So that led to a lot of searches online, a lot of Googling around of what makes a good systems administrator. So I came across podcasts and Telegram groups of different people working on Linux. And I realized that Linux wasn't just open source as a license, but open source was actually a bigger community outside of Linux itself. So it was really interesting. I mean, it was just it blew my mind. And I came across podcasts like uh, the Linux Action Show and Linux Unplugged from Future Broadcasting. I came across things like, uh, gosh, I don't even remember if Floss Weekly was a thing yet, but just different podcasts that talked about nothing but Linux and this open source thing. So I got to learn a lot about Linux, a lot about self-hosting. Around this time, I bought my first home server, and I use that term loosely because I basically had a custom built uh, desktop that I used for gaming, and so I started dual booting Fedora or Ubuntu or Arch on it. So I basically took that one and then converted it over to running CentOS Linux as a server, and my first project was running Minecraft. I wanted something that I could use, but also something that would help me learn a little bit more about Linux. So stood up my first Minecraft server, and that led to, okay, cool. What other things can I do with this? And so I ended up building an identical tower, and that became my workstation. And I had this massive PC that started running Minecraft, and then and then, eventually, stood up something like Nextcloud, and then I realized you could host your own media, and so years and years and years ago, over 10 years ago, I bought a Plex life cycle or lifelong membership at Plex Premium or whatever it was called at the time, and so I've hosted my own home lab for years, and it's taken different forms. I've tried enterprise grade hardware, which I'm trying to get out of. I've I've tried building my own custom builds. I've used DigitalOcean to host most, if not all, of my home lab, so it's taken a lot of different forms over the years. But then I found that to be one of the biggest strengths, of being a Linux systems administrator is play with it outside of work, in space where you can learn and make mistakes and grow and just, uh, always learn, always try new things. So I grew from being a Linux systems administrator to being a Linux systems engineer, but there was still this whole problem with I liked working on Linux systems. I liked building things out new. I didn't so much like the day-to-day, investigation of trying to figure out why this bug was happening or track this log file or keep these systems running, and I didn't like being stuck at my desk all day. I liked talking to people. I liked getting to know what they were working on and learning, and, so I went to a conference here in Kansas City in 2018, DevOps Days KC, and, listen to all these talks about automation and how this company built out this massive multi-thousand node Linux environment that could spin up in the data center and then overflow out to the cloud. And I listened to people talk about how they merged dev workflows into ops and used tools like SaltStack, which was my first automation love. Uh, and declarative states and infrastructure that wouldn't deal with configuration drift. And it's just so cool. And so during one of the breaks, I was walking through the expo hall, and I think this is why I love going to conferences even today. I was walking around the expo hall, and I came across a booth with this Tanuki that looked like an orange fox. And I was like, "Oh, I know you guys." It turned out it was GitLab, and we were using a self-hosted GitLab at the company I was at to store salt stack configurations and config files for our Linux servers. I was like, I really like your tool. This is great. We use it for salt stack." And I got talking to the guy. He turned out to be one of the sales guys for GitLab back right after the whole hashtag move to GitLab. When Microsoft bought GitHub, and everybody thought that was the end of open source because GitHub is now owned by the enemy. Funny how that didn't pan out the way we thought it would. But, he's like, what brings you here?" And I got to asking some questions. He's like, "You know what? You've got a lot of personality for someone who claims that they're systems administrator. You should I won't forget the way he said it. He said, "You don't get a choice. Go home tonight, put in an application. I'll put my name on it, and we'll see what happens. You should come work at GitLab. We could really use that energy." And so I did, because when someone tells you you don't have a choice, you tend to do what they say. And so I went home and applied. I had an amazing, interview and got to do my first demo. Uh, it was really cool. Uh, and I got hired on. In fact, my former manager, Joel Kruzwick, was on the show a couple of episodes ago, and we got to chat and catch up. He's still one of my mentors and one of my friends in the industry today. And it was this beautiful blend of learning technology and showing people how things work and building new things that don't have to survive more than a day. It was just a really great experience, uh, to go into sales, to do demos, and to go to conferences. I met so many of you at places like Northwest Linux Fest or Southeast Linux Fest, or DevOps Days. And I got to go to conferences and give talks, and I guested on I was guested. I was a guest on podcasts like Linux Unplugged and the Ask Noah Show, Destination Linux. It was just such a cool change in my career. Um, so while will always see myself as a systems administrator, I see myself as so much more than that. And today, uh, was at GitLab for a year. I tried sales for a couple of years, first at GitLab, then at Red Hat, and then I found technical marketing, and that was content creation, blog writing, building demos, and doing podcasts and live streams and sometimes doing demos live on air, like, into the terminal, where if things broke, you got to fix it on the air while, dozens of people are watching. And it just really blew up my whole vision of what the world would look like. It just completely expanded what I had thought the industry looked like. 'Cause it seemed like you were either a developer, systems administration, a manager, or a networking guy, maybe a security guy, and that was kind of it. It was only so I figured when I was done being a systems administrator that I just have to become a people manager. And now, more than a decade later, I look at my career and go, "There's so many more options. There's so many things out there that you can do in tech that doesn't necessarily mean you just sit in front of a desk all day." I kind of pictured myself as like this guy who worked directly on the matrix, that I could read all those characters as they scrolled across the screen and guide Neo to doing amazing things, only to realize that, maybe I was more like Morpheus. I go out and recruit people and show them the ropes and set them on their path. That's what I see myself as doing. And I never would have imagined changing my dad's desktop wallpaper on his first family computer, or going to DeVry, that one day I would be a professor. I'd never imagined that I'd go and talk in front of people at a conference, or that I'd have my own podcast. None of that seemed like what my career was going to be. So there's people like Noah Chelaya and Joel Cruzwick and Brandon Johnson and all these people that I've engaged with, people that have amazing careers that have guided me along the way. So that's one of the things I try and do with this show, and I think it's important early on in the life of the show to establish that. I see myself as a teacher, as a coach, as someone who doesn't have all the answers, but I can definitely help you along your path. And that's what I love about this show. That's what I love about the community of people that we're building on our Discord. I mean, it's a great opportunity to network with people and to know that there's no expectations. There's no right or wrong. There's just a group of nerds hanging out, talking about D&D and Linux, and and growing together as people. So what are some of the lessons I learned? You've got to evolve with the industry. And right now, systems administrators are at a bit of a turning point. If you're not using Ansible or SaltStack or Terraform or something to build out your network, to build out your enterprise of servers, you really need to think about what you're working on, because things are moving faster. We're expected to do more with less now more than ever. Um, and then there's technologies like AI. And sure, you may scoff at that. I trust me, I did a little bit too. But AI tools like, Red Hat's Lightspeed or ChatGPT even are getting so powerful and so knowledgeable about things like Ansible playbooks that now you can sit at your desk and do paired programming with an AI chat interface and build out hundreds of lines of Ansible playbooks to automate your infrastructure. That's something that I'm doing right now here in my home lab. And then that's expanding even further so fast that nowadays there's even things like MCPs which allow AI to interact with your systems or interact with tools like Grafana. I mean, it's amazing how fast the industry is changing. And that doesn't mean that systems administrators, hardware junkies like us, goofs that would go into the data center and run cables for hours, aren't necessary anymore. Sure, our job has changed. I remember when we used to have to buy a single piece of hardware for every operating system. Then we went to virtualization, and then we went to cloud, and then we went to containers, and then we went to things like Kubernetes. There's just so much out there and things are changing, but that doesn't mean that what you do isn't still important. So I often get asked what skills still matter today. And I think above all, it's not a technology, it's the soft skills. And I hated hearing that when I was trying to learn. Tools come and go, used to be Puppet was the only name in IT automation, and now there's Puppet and Ansible and Terraform and some of the offshoots of of that, like OpenTofu. There's just so many options out there, and you just gotta find the one that works for you and works for your environment. But to me, the skill that has made the biggest difference in my life is never stop learning. Always try something new. Don't ever settle for the status quo. Always keep learning. One of the other questions I get asked often is, "What would I do differently if I started over?" Honestly, nothing. I mentioned in the intro that my career seemed like such a weird jump from place to place and doing different things and having different job titles and then going into marketing. But looking back, everything I did, all the different places I went from working full time at a company for years to doing a couple of 6 month and a couple of 12-month contracts, all of that helped me get to where I am today, to where I feel like I can share my experiences and I hope and pray that when I do, that someone out there listening learns from it, doesn't make some of the mistakes I made, or finds a new love for their career, or somehow helps start a new chapter or the first chapter of a career. I don't know that I'd do anything different. The one thing I will say though, the question that I get asked is, what happens if you're just not good enough? Oh, buddy, let me tell you, I have never felt like I was good enough at a job. I've always dealt with imposter syndrome. But I look at my career and I've gone from managing 500 Linux systems to 1,000 Linux systems. I went from working at small businesses that no one will ever know existed because they made specialty hardware for a certain type of car and they don't exist anymore, to working for big names like GitLab and Red Hat. It's been a wild ride, and I don't feel worth it. And so that's just something that you have to accept, something you have to move ahead with, and not let it hinder you, but let it challenge you. If you don't think you're the smartest person in the room, go learn something new. Go pick up a Udemy course. Go watch demos on YouTube. There's just so much material out there, more than ever. Um, but don't ever feel like you're not good enough. Go out and change something. Go out and make a difference. So that's been a bit about my story. I've told pieces of this from time to time, but I've never really sat down and kinda talked it through. Even if I was recording this, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot about that anecdote. I forgot about that story, or I forgot about that time that I multicasted ghost traffic onto the main network instead of the workstation network." It's just there's so much to talk about, and I love going to conferences and the after conference, hanging out with different people, grabbing a drink and telling stories and sharing pains and solving the world's problems with open source. Um, it's been such a fulfilling career, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where this current chapter goes. If you want to be part of that journey, you can definitely hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you get every new episode. I've got these content scheduled through the end of the year. We've got so many episodes, so many amazing guests that are more dynamic and exciting to listen to than myself. So definitely hit the subscribe button. Uh, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to be joined by Nate Legger, Red Hatter and a friend of mine. He's going to be talking about his experience in systems administration, what it was like working in education, some of his hobbies and interests. So Nate's going to be joining me again in two, or again, Nate's going to be joining me in 2 weeks when I post the next episode. Please, like, I know it's dumb, but just hit the little thumbs up button. It really helps grease the algorithm so that more people can find this channel. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, there's links in the show notes to uh, my blog, to our Discord server, and to our Matrix server. So there's plenty of ways to get in touch with me. Definitely head out and check the show notes. But until then, this has been episode 13 of the IT Guy Show, how I became a sysadmin. I really look forward to talking to you all again real soon. Thank you much.